Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. My name is Nils, co-founder at Digi Studio. In the last episode of the podcast, Daniel and I talked about how communication is hard. This is also one of these things that everybody actually sort of knows about. Like, we all know that it's hard to deliver the point that you're trying to make to someone else, right? Like, we're always in these situations. We're trying to explain something to our parents, to a coworker, to our boss, to whoever, and with mixed success, I would say. And so, continuing the story on how we make digital products and how we believe that making digital products, the process can be improved and can be made more successful. Today, Daniel and I talk about the minimum viable product. I'm sure everybody who's listening to the show came into contact with the term of the MVP. The famous MVP probably entered your life, or is actually like a tool that you use, rightfully so, on a continuous basis. And also MVPs have this way of defining themselves. And without further ado, I want to transfer into the show and get Daniel on, because I'm very excited for this episode. I think there's a lot of juicy insights in there on our way to build a successful digital product. Welcome, Daniel, to the show.
Hello.
Hey. So our topic today are minimum viable products. The myth of the MVP. And we want to talk about MVPs, how they are usually dealt with or where they come into play, and our hands-on experiences with how MVPs were built in our experience. That's the story for today.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Maybe let's clear up what an MVP actually is or what the acronym stands for.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this is the minimum viable product.
And what does that mean? Like, what's that supposed to mean?
Yeah, I'm not convinced I really know. I think the idea is that you build a very small product that is viable in the sense that it helps solve a challenge that you know exists in a certain problem space.
Yeah.
And you try to get there as fast as possible with as little features as possible to actually test if your product might solve the challenge that you set out to solve.
Yeah. That's what I remember too. And so, like, I think I always have to at least start to smile when someone tosses around the term.
Yeah.
I think it's like whenever somebody comes in and says something MVP, I'm always like, okay.
Yeah. We've heard that a lot, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I have a lot of experiences with MVPs from my startup times back then. Where did you encounter MVPs in your career that let you form an opinion on this?
I don't have a strong opinion on this. I also, with clients from the startup world, I experienced that, and also in our joint phase in this agency, we've worked on MVPs, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. Do you have like an MVP story to share? Like how,
So I think how I experienced it usually, how I experienced an MVP coming into existence is that, it's launched in a way where the step before the launch is that an engineering team is working out all the bugs that are in a code base that is a bit messy because it was built in a short time frame.
Yeah.
And everybody's rushing in fix some details, fix some wording, fix some copy in the interface. And designers build like last minute iterations on the design
Yeah.
that then the engineering team goes ahead and implement. And then there's like a short testing phase because you've already overrun the budget and the time frame that you set out.
Yeah, but like
And
testing, technical testing, right? Like
technical
just to make
testing
sure that
just to make sure that there's no bugs in there, that the app actually launches or works as expected, I guess.
yeah, so what you're describing already involves a designer and a developer, at least one, but you're probably even talking about teams. So I think that's sort of interesting how it came to that point already,
Yeah. So what happened
right?
before was probably that, I mean, there is a whole engineering part to it that we can maybe uh, not talk at length about, but an engineering team sets up like a build environment and some APIs that are required to get the product to launch.
Yeah,
But there's, of course, also the design team that does a big part of the work in getting the product designed, basically. So they draw screen designs from wireframes they put up before,
yeah.
together with probably the one person whose idea this was, or even a product manager.
Yeah. In my experience, there was always already a product manager, which is like, so at my experiences was always like early startups that were literally just created. Like the first thing that we always did was to make an MVP. But like interestingly enough, like I didn't know a lot about it back then. But so I sort of, as a designer and front-end developer back then, I just found myself in a round of, well, the one or two or three C levels who were sort of the founders of this particular startup. Then there was a product manager. There was always a product manager. Sometimes there was even like a customer success person already, which I found super curious because it was like, we don't have any customers. Right? And
Yeah.
well, and then there was most of the times even someone like a sysops person, and then the first couple of weeks were sort of somebody raised money from wherever, from an angel investor or from a venture capitalist or something. The money came in, the excitement grew to unbearable levels because we were unlocked to do stuff. Then, like even contracts for the office that we're working in were signed, the office furniture was bought, like the ramp up of an entire company sort of happened while we were making this MVP. And I think what always struck me a little bit was that since we had nothing, to whoever's idea this was, to the founders, it was always clear that whatever we put out there, it should be minimal, of course, but the definition of minimal was always, I think, the arguing point, because from their perspective, minimal also means, well, we sort of need at least a logo and colors defined. Like people have to know who put out this product, right?
Yeah.
So the MVP had to be designed. It had to have like a minimal brand. Then with the definition of a brand, we know that today, of course, like, sure, you can just make a logo with a
Then
flower
find a
pot on
color.
it. Or, yeah,
Easy.
exactly. Like whatever.
Yeah.
But to the point that you were describing with the developers, like I think to no one in our team back then, we didn't have any clarity on how this MVP would be used. And what I mean by that is we didn't really know how mature the idea was. So I never knew if they did their discovery research, for example, right? Like I didn't know if they just had a hot plan and are just very convincing people and managed to raise money on a whim, or if they actually did market research,
I mean,
And
they put in work to convince people that it's a viable product that
yes,
should be built. and they had an idea for how their product should look like, feel like, work, I guess.
Exactly.
So uh, there has to have been some kind of research.
Yeah. And I mean, they always were very convincing. Like wherever I came in, like I don't know, I lived through this like 2 or 3 times at least back then in my startup phase, before going freelance and agency. I know that I didn't have a shadow of a doubt. Like the idea was presented, the entire premise totally makes sense. And I always, like I kind of sat down and started to draw the thing because I thought, yes, that's a brilliant idea. We have to make that right away.
But this process, in my experience, is often not without hurdles, right? So the design team sets up a layout and presents it to the people who have had the idea, or the product manager. And then discussions start also with engineering, like what's possible to do in the time frame that we have and to reach the milestones past.
And I think that's a very interesting point. Like, usually in the beginning, we were like 10 people or whatever, but we were already 10 people. And
Yeah.
everybody knows how an unplanned meeting with 10 people goes, right? Like, there's no way that this is shorter than an hour. No way at all. And usually, like, this was just super hot potato mode. Somebody came in with this idea, we started to go, and then, as you say, like, developers had concerns that it would be possible to build in the time frame set. The product manager always made like a case to add just like one little more feature into the scope of the MVP, because they thought whatever we had at the moment was not viable, was not enough, right? Like this, we tried to build this one idea, and then there was like a second feature and a third feature, right? And this is how it always went. And I think I never was part of an MVP process that was, I want to say, half a year. Maybe we did it in 3 months or whatever, but it was never shorter than this.
Yeah, in my experience, that like the first idea of the product that was supposed to be built rarely was the one that then launched. Like
That's also true.
that's my experience, at least, that the idea changes over time of this process.
Yeah, so I think I often had the case that we started with one thing, then tacked on another thing, because like we were sort of finished with the first one, and then I don't know where this came from, but I'm pretty sure that it was, well, either the founder or the product manager who said, well, this is very nice, but I don't think people can use this already. Like it doesn't do enough. Like, why should they use only this one feature? So let's build another one and another one. And by the time we reached feature number 3 or 4, people were starting to doubt what we did in the beginning. And we had never put it online during that phase. I think we only showed it to our closed group of whoever was in the company at the time,
Yeah,
right?
I also think that in my experience, it might have also been an issue of understanding within the team what the actual idea was supposed to be. So even the alignment in the team the wasn't working properly, basically. So somebody pitched the idea and everybody was like, oh yeah, I get it, but everybody had a different idea of what it is,
Like an
and that led
interpretation
to
of, yeah.
yeah, and that led to different things that needed to be done afterwards and put on there to make this idea work for everybody.
Totally. And I think I was always so stressed out by the fact that we were adding more stuff, that we were changing the stuff because somebody said that the button is in the wrong place, or that it needs like 3 more fields
Yeah.
to fulfill this and that use case, you know? Um, and then also, because we were adding more and more stuff, um, there was always this point that came pretty quickly where at least engineering came along and said, are we building this for real? Because we were kind of doing this, like, sure, this is a real thing, but from the tech stack perspective, like from code quality and scalability of the code base, we were actually not thinking in these terms because we thought we were doing this to test something quickly.
Yeah.
And I think then that was usually the point where the heated frustration phase started, because there was always a heated frustration phase. There was I remember in one example even that they started to hire salespeople and marketing people who were then on the hype train. I'm not sure that those people even knew that we were talking about whatever was described as an MVP in the beginning. So we never arrived at the point to jump off the train, to stop and look at it, I guess.
Yeah.
And then they started to market it as if it was a real product already.
Yeah. I mean, it then kind of was. Somebody built their product and launched it with all the features that came along and built on technology that worked out, but was maybe not meant to be scaled or run in the long term. And the same is true for the design, I guess. There's no design system in place. Everything was just put together on a screen to be fast. So there were cut corners everywhere.
There were cut corners everywhere. And I mean, from something that happened, maybe that's a little bit unique to Europe as a market, but Europe is like a very, it's a diverse place. I think there's always the point that came very, very quickly, especially with startups that were funded through venture capital, is that we always had after like the first, not even year, I guess, half a year, we started to expand into other countries in Europe. So we usually started out with English, but not because we were selling in the UK or whatever, but just because the team structure, like people coming on in the startup bubble of Berlin, were from everywhere. And so the language that was spoken internally was English at the time. And I think so we just naturally built this thing in English, which for me, as the designer and front-end developer back at the time, was like a teeny tiny, very annoying problem in itself, because English is, compared to German or French, just very short. Like all the designs would explode when we suddenly started to use German or French copy. But I think more importantly than that is that for this MVP state, for this first tryout, like all of the cut corners included that you couldn't really translate the software into another language. And so like the rewrite of the code base usually came after like the first half year. And there was so much code that we threw away and just started from scratch, knowing everything that we did then. And I think we had a couple of customers at that point already. But so this was not like an MVP to test or whatever. This was more of what they call a soft launch today, or like a, like launch darkly sort of. Just kind of creep into the market and suddenly be there. Ta-da!
Should we look at what an MVP actually is supposed to be?
I asked my trusty friend Perplexity, what's an MVP, question mark. And it says, a minimum viable product is a fundamental concept in product development, particularly within the startup ecosystem. It refers to a version of a new product that includes only the essential features necessary to satisfy early adopters and gather feedback for future enhancements. Definition and purpose. The term minimum viable product was popularized by Eric Ries in his book The Lean Startup, where he defined it as the version of a product that allows a team to collect maximum amount of validated learning about customers with the least effort. The primary goals were testing assumptions. An MVP helps validate or invalidate business hypotheses by providing real-world data on user interactions and user preferences. There's an interesting bit in there already, I think. Early user feedback. By launching an MVP, teams can obtain feedback from early users, which is crucial for refining the product before a full-scale launch. Resource efficiency. Developing an MVP minimizes wasted resources by focusing on core functionalities rather than extensive features that may not be desired by users. I don't know when Eric Ries wrote the book The Lean Startup, but it's probably longer than 10 years ago.
I think it's more like 20 or 25.
Yeah. So...
yeah, I think like in a general sense, the processes that we live through are kind of an MVP. But I also think that they, at least in my experience, sometimes miss the whole point of the MVP still. Like they launched fast, they reduced the feature set, of course, but the points about the user feedback being the one thing that you're after is often neglected, I think.
I wonder if this was a thing that we just got wrong in Germany or whatever, because I think I never really concerned myself with the deep meaning of MVP and what it meant really. Like I think I also back then I didn't look up the definition or whatever. I just remember that I always felt stressed by especially the endless discussions. Like those were, I think, really poisonous to our progress, because I usually liked the ideas. I was super convinced, like whenever somebody came in with a business idea or a new feature idea, then it did sound like a good idea, like a good solution to a problem that somebody might have. And we went away, like we kind of, everybody was super hyped, and we started to put together the concept and, didn't finish it because we wanted to code it right away, and everybody was on fire, really. Like, I mean, I don't know. I remember sleeping on a ping pong table.
Yeah.
So, we really wanted to get this thing on the road. But with every week that this thing was not visible to whoever our customers were supposed to be, us as the product team, we sort of felt the increasing pressure from management, because I think they were growing anxious. Like they were, the fears of missing the goal were ramping up. And I think those are multidimensional. Like it was just like they had the idea that they would launch till this and that time, or we missed it. And then we tried to make this feature, and somebody said, oh, well, but this feature alone is probably not enough to get someone to pay for it. And we don't want a free trial or give it out for free or something. And so the discussions started. And the discussions always disrupted the design process and the motivation of the team so hard, because we changed features where we knew that nobody saw them before. Yeah. Nobody ever had used what we built, and then it was trashed.
And you invested a lot into the design being ready on time, and also the functionality being implemented on time. Like there's also an investment from the engineers to make it work in an elegant way. And so everybody already had a stake in what they built and what they were putting out there.
I mean, from my startup experiences back then, I can't really speak about how management felt like we spoke a lot, of course, and I knew that they had their own, like that the discussions were not coming from nowhere. Like they didn't want the discussions, but they just inevitably came up, I think.
Yeah.
And that is, yeah, because no one of us was really in a position to judge if this did what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, you were building your product at that point.
Yeah. But we didn't, we couldn't really drink our own Kool-Aid. Like, like we were not a small merchant that wanted to take card payments. I was not a private customer who wanted to test cosmetic products. So what do I know about this? We were making an e-com platform and checkout flows and sign-up flows and know your customer journeys and dashboards, change your password thing, reminder emails, like all of those things that also today, I suppose, are much easier to make.
Yeah, I think so. I think we learned a lot, like in the whole process, setup and design. We learned a lot.
You mean in the industry?
Yeah, I think on all sides there has been a lot of reckoning with all these things not going that well, I think.
Yeah.
And I have the feeling that we know better how to build an MVP now. That it's an idea that has matured, and you've seen it fail and you've seen it succeed, and now you know better where the trade-offs are, basically.
I mean, and the discussions between what's a feature that somebody would need to actually solve their problem using your thing, those are not exclusive to the MVP discussion, I would say. Like, I mean,
No.
This is sort of where our big turning point in our existence as an agency lies. I think we talked about this many times before, that our eye-opening event was to take the leap of faith and actually work with a dedicated usability research expert who just has such a different view on product development.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yeah,
we
and
were
I think
always in this tech space, in this tech point of view.
Yeah, and I think we learned that everything we do is or needs to be an MVP, basically.
Yeah.
So whenever we talk about a feature or a small change, I think, started to look at it from the perspective of what's the MVP version of this.
And why? Right? I think that was always literally my big fat question in any discussion with agency customers, when we were part of a team and tasked to build a certain feature. I think after a couple years of experience, I didn't, before we started to work with Sipo as our research expert in many fields, I think I always wanted an answer to that question, but I never really knew where to get it from, other than to just take my whatever I built and show it to a couple people, but in a very unstructured way,
Yeah, I think part of it is that I at least usually buy into the ideas that I work on. Like, they sound plausible, and I go ahead and think about it, and then I'm like, yeah, I can see this work, and then I get invested in the idea, and then I work on the idea and make it my own a bit. And then it becomes hard to think about, why should we do this?
Or why should we not do this, maybe?
Yeah.
Right? Like, once you start it, I wonder if this counts for management people as well. But I would guess so, right? Like, once you're sort of invested in an idea and you're in the middle of working on it, well, then you sort of want to see it through, I guess. Right? Like, who likes to stop in the middle and just start over?
Yeah.
That's horrible.
Or abandon the idea altogether.
Yeah, just imagine you go in a supermarket, you're 3/4 done, and you just leave the cart and go. And then you come back the next day just to go through the supermarket in a different route to again leave the cart.
Maybe, yeah.
So frustrating. So frustrating. And I think the first time that I experienced the result of Nocifo's work in that, and I think that's the important part. Like we talked to people back then, like once we finally, like after whatever, like a couple months, and finally somebody put their foot down and said, I don't care if somebody has something to say about this. We're putting this online now. I've had it up to here. I need to know if somebody buys this now or not. Right? And then, sure, like we all asked our friends to sign up, and then we gave them like a coupon code so they could do it for free or whatever. But, you know, like all of that meant that we already even had like a payment system in place. Yeah. Ridiculous. You know, like how much work this is to implement all of that stuff. And I mean, back then, I guess there was like a big wave to ride on in startup land. Like there were so many startups that were being funded with amazing amounts of money, right? Like Berlin was bustling back then. It was crazy. But because of this, also everybody was running to be the first to have like a good thing online to scale up then. Because also back then it was like the numbers were similar as they are today, interestingly enough, that at least, I don't know, like, I don't know if it's 60, 70 or 80, but it's a high percentage where like at least more than half of all startups would fail. And I would even say like more than 2/3 in...
Yeah, I think so too.
Right? And so it was this crazy race. Like it felt like a race.
Yeah.
Right? To be the first who has not fucked it up. Yeah.
I think the point being that you needed something on the road, actually. You need to, like, the MVP needs to be live. And this made it, like, this turned it into a product in most cases, is what I experienced or saw from the outside.
That is, I think, one common denominator I also experienced. Whenever, through whatever painful decision and 17th late night meeting, somebody had the guts to decide, push the button, please. Please make this publicly available now. Whenever we did that, and it was not like a complete failure, then we were able to move into iteration mode. Yeah. And that was much better than the first phase was very exciting, but also exhausting, right? Like the tension that built up from all the sides. Like I guess, you know, like the founders, of course, were worried that they would not hit the milestone that they had agreed upon with the venture capital firm. We thought we built bugs into it. I thought nobody would get my user interface. Mm-hmm. Doubts everywhere.
It's probably true. It's probably all true. But it might also not matter all too much. This is the iteration part, I think, is very encouraging in most cases. At least that's what I see from the stuff we build nowadays and the stuff that worked out in the end, that the initial feedback is usually not that great. And the initial feedback is also hard to hear sometimes. But then you actually have something to work with from actual users.
Then you have something to work with. That is true. And I mean, coming back to the definition of an MVP, the early user feedback and the resource efficiency and the validating or invalidating business hypotheses, I guess it's really hard to know what makes a minimum product viable.
Yeah,
right?
So true.
I mean, to our story from before, I think the earlier you actually start to get feedback, as harsh as it may be, it also, I mean, the amount of negative feedback that you can even receive directly correlates with how many features you put out there at once.
Yeah.
If you put out 12 things and they're all crap, expect a lot of crap. I would say, as bluntly as it is. But if you just, if you're very modest about it and very humble, and you're like, well, so we saw this problem space and we tried to make this one thing, and we just want you to try. As someone who we spoke to before, who has this challenge in their business, can you, give us like 5 minutes of your time in exchange for a piece of cake? Can you try this, please? And I think that's something that I learned when we finally started to work with usability testing on a regular basis as an integral part of our design processes at Dingy, is that when you have something that is small enough for someone to actually, grasp in a minute and then test, and they sort of understand that this is for them. Like, if you make it past this point and people actually get to, kafutzle around with whatever you made, and you can see them, then you know that you made a good thing or a bad thing.
And that worked out really well for us. I think the shift in perspective from how do we build the perfect product to how do we test this idea as fast as possible was crucial in that regard. Like we actually started to draw something up with a pencil, basically, and showed it to people to see what they would think. And then you realize that a lot of work is already in drawing with a pencil, because you still need to get the message right to tell them what they're supposed to look at. And this is usually the hard part about building a product too, I think.
What do you mean? Can you expand on that a little bit?
So we, when building interfaces, we think a lot about the technical constraints and the functionality that we want to build and the problem that we want to solve. And I think sometimes we put too little focus on the actual translation of the real world problem into the microcopy, so that people understand what this is supposed to do. And if you don't have an interface that you can click or that you can work with that actually solves your problem, but you have a prototype that only displays the screens in the order that they would be clicked through, but it doesn't actually solve your specific problem,
like
then you need to start
even,
a paper
like
prototype or like a click dummy or something.
Yeah.
Then you actually need to start thinking about how do you explain what's happening here. And this is the part that real products often miss, I think, that they don't explain very well what they're doing. So people have to learn them and they need to get used to them, and then they know, so this is how I use it, and then they get it. And if it solves their problem, then fine. But I think shifting the focus to just explain what we're doing here actually helps validate the idea, because people are like, I get it, this would be helpful. And it is also the groundwork for a great product that then intuitively works.
That is definitely something that also, I'm not sure if it changed for everyone, but it's like, as I just realized it, like as you speak about it, that when I was starting out as a UI designer, and then, as a front-end developer, but like always, working on the user interface, right? I think I often did what you described, that I was working on this, and then I didn't really know what this button should say now, so I probably just put OK on it. or
more.
cancel or more. Exactly, you know?
Yeah.
And because everyone we talked to about what we were making was our own group of people on the product team or the founders, who, of course, because they were hawk-eyeing us all the time in you know, in anticipation of finally the launch date. So everybody knew what the UI did. And it never really surfaced that nobody actually knew what okay meant in this context.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, because everybody knows what it's supposed to do.
Exactly. And if it actually saves and closes a document, maybe call it save and close.
Yeah.
It's much like, I think, to step out of your own shoes and to try whatever you build with somebody else without all of the knowledge that you have, that is so eye-opening that I'm wondering if the approach to building software actually changed over the last 10 years. What do you
At least
think?
for me, it did.
For
Like
me, it did, absolutely, yeah.
yeah,
But I'm wondering, like, how startups operate by now. I mean, the lean startup, 20 years old, like, there's so many good paradigms being publicly available on how to set up a good process and how to successfully develop a product. That's still, especially with the MVP thing, I could totally see how we just, interpreted like 70% of the original meaning, just to sort of to incorporate like a cool term to label what we were doing. I think it was
yeah. I
like
think it's yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead,
no, it
please.
was just like a way to, I don't know, to kind of say that it's okay what we're doing right now because it has a name. Like, it's what we're doing is the MVP phase, all right? So stop bugging us.
Yeah, I think it's also hard to like it takes experience to see where you run into all these like scope creep dangers and put a feature on there that you think is required to make it viable without actually testing it. Like it's just a lot of experience that goes into that.
And it's also, I think to this day, to me, it's very astonishing on how hard it is to make software, actually.
Yeah, and make it work well,
Make it work
especially.
well. Like,
Yeah.
there's so many factors that go into the success of a piece of software that's actually useful. And it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter if it's on your phone, on your computer, if it's in your washing machine. It seriously doesn't matter. But I think this mix of different stakeholders in the process, that is so crazy. Like, everyone is in there, designers, coders, founders who had the idea, product managers, customer success people who actually hear the problems that people have using your software. And coming back to an episode we did earlier about how communication is hard, I think this is really such a central concept that you'll just run into problems if you think that you can just assume that people understand stuff. Because admitting that you didn't understand something fully, or admitting that you're doing something incorrectly, I don't know, at least in Germany, that's still a problem. And that's something that I've spoken about a lot in my entire career, I would say, that this is something that people in the US are just so much better at. Like what's called fail culture, right? Like, that it's okay to fail, and that it's actually one of the best ways to learn is to screw it up, first of all,
Yeah.
and then to make it better. And that's just hard in Germany, I think. That if you screw it up, then it's like, it's okay, but you screwed it up, So sad for you.
Yeah. And I think this is actually what makes the getting the user feedback as early as possible. What makes it so valuable is that you don't like the stakes are not that high. The earlier you do this, the lower the stakes because you didn't invest a lot of time, you didn't include a lot of people, you just went ahead and validated an idea.
Totally.
Usually the feedback is not that great to a first product launch, right?
Yeah. And you did everything you thought you were supposed to do.
Yeah, you built something fast, you launched it, you got it out there to get feedback, and now you start to iterate.
After all, you're a startup, right? I mean, I think that was always a very interesting experience for me when also talking to my friends who were not working in startup land. Everything was different. Everybody was comparably nuts about their thing. Like, everything was possible. You could throw out your entire tool chain overnight if you'd like to, or if it was good enough. But so what went wrong, right? Like, what's the problem here?
Yeah, I think now, like, with what we've learned during the last couple of years and months, I think what we realized is that this process was probably still more time consuming and costly than it should have been, right?
And in what terms of cost? I think because it's not only money, it's not only time and money. I think it's almost also like I think this whole motivation part is a big one that always was underestimated, I think. At least we never talked about it back then.
Yeah.
Right?
So whenever you build something for real to put it out there, you have people who invest into the idea and who build something that they then feel like they have a sense of ownership about it, right? And you've probably taken shortcuts, you've discussed a lot, like which feature goes into the MVP, what should be launched at first. And some people, like, this plays with the motivation of people because they can be demotivating to discuss your features a lot, like you mentioned before.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a huge part, and I also think from our perspective as an agency today, this doesn't only apply to startups. Like, we're talking about startups a lot, but this entire story can also just be. It can be like your next big feature in a bigger established organization that feels almost like a little startup inside of this business because you're a team, you're working on your own, like you're doing all of the stuff, like you don't have to go raise money, but you received KPIs for what you're supposed to build there. And so those have to be met, right? And so you have the same ramp up of expectations and of the level of success that this will bring to the organization. This really applies to, let's just stay in software development, but I think this really applies to making anything, to be honest. But I mean, let's stay with what we know, and that's how to make a digital product. And I think to overcome this stress and this potential, if you just head out and do it without any consideration of what the user will think before you actually finish and show it, and you sort of by accident nail it, then cool, or I don't know, then that's probably all right-ish. But I would say, as we see from the numbers of startups failing, I don't have any numbers of how many corporate initiatives fail because of this reason. I suppose there's numbers out there. I don't know, let's go see. But like, just from if we see numbers like 70% of startups don't make it to round B or something, then I would say that's a very impressively high number. And to get away from this should be in everybody's interest, really. Like, this is something that is super painful for everyone involved. I know I can speak from the product side of things, because we were always at the end of the process, sort of. Like the last one in line to actually make the thing working and then put it on the internet. Maybe not like sysops were the very last in line. They had to actually press the button to put it on the production environment. But also, this must be horrible for anyone who's in charge, who's like a stakeholder in this, because of the anticipation ramp up that you, and the anxiety that you're missing whatever you were trying to make, right? And so let's talk about how we can get out of this, I would say.
Yeah. So as mentioned before, I think this it all comes down to the time you invest, and how building software is hard and takes time, and how you should try your best to not invest this time into building software, but to focus on validating your idea first. And only do the things that you need to do to validate if something works the way you think it should work.
When we started to work, testing first, sort of, like usability testing first, or even one step ahead, like discovery research first, for real, and not just a bar conversation. It's like, do you think that's a good idea? People have their problem, right? And it's like, yeah, totally, of course, like, let's go. No, I'm exaggerating, of course, but like, to have a good plan and to have a sufficiently large group of people confirm that this is something that they're struggling with, that's a good premise to go. And it's also a very, very motivating situation, because you know for a fact that there is something where people are struggling, and where you could potentially make something that takes the struggle away. And that should be the goal of any software being built, I would say. And so the first time we had a usability testing on basically a paper prototype, or the equivalent of this, which was, I think, in our project for Relayer last year, where we just had like a black and white, very crude wireframe that we literally put together in an hour, because there was some discussion on what should be on the first part of the website, on the hero, what it should say about the product. And I think we had doubts as the agency coming in, who are not, well, industrial IoT professionals. So I think we were still in the process of even understanding what they were selling. And I know it could have been you. Somebody said, let's just make a wireframe and show that to someone. Let's just, put down the words. And then somebody said, but we don't have an image. Are we even going to include the logo? We said, no, nobody cares. Let's put this on a screen, show it to whoever is the customer group. So in this case, I think we also discussed that project before. That was like a little bit special, because there was like high profile decision makers at companies who run an industrial plant. But this counts for everyone. Like, if you're making a B2C product, then get someone from this target group, or 5. You don't even need 50 people. Just get like a handful of people who don't know what you're doing yet, and show them something. As long as they can, you get on a call, or you sit down with them even, but like, get on a call, send them your thing, let them do screen sharing, and just observe how they look at whatever they are looking at. Like, their facial expression on just reading through your headline will reveal so many things
Yeah.
And this was like coming out of that process that we actually talked to 3 people by just showing them a wireframe. They didn't even ask why there was not a picture. Like I told them in the beginning was like, this is a very early concept, but so the most important part for us is if you actually understand what we're selling from this headline. And then you can scroll and click, like, let's see where it takes you. But we actually kind of just want to know if you know what we're talking about. And they didn't care that it was not designed or on brand or had like a video of the product or whatever. They just looked at this, read through the headline, and then spoke for 20 minutes from their experience, from their business, from why we didn't nail this, how this is wrong, what we're saying, that we're using the term wrong or whatever. And you could learn so much from this. And we put it together in an hour. That was such a reassuring experience, really, because I imagined the times that we did this with a website that we had worked on for a week.
Yeah. We launched websites, like plenty websites, without doing this exercise ever. And
Ever,
then
really,
wondering why the engagement was low or the bounce rates were high.
Yeah, or you receive even feedback from internal team members at the customer's organization who were like, that there's something missing here? Or that, that digital transformation actually means something else? Like I didn't mind to get the feedback that we were using the wrong terms for this special scenario because we only invested an hour, right? Like I think I would have been a lot more demotivated if I had just spent like a week or more, like if we just worked in a silo for half a year, put this online, and the first thing somebody says is like, this is wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But so, where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think now that we've used this method a lot, it shows that it also unblocks a lot of things down the road from there. So it's not just that you just validated your idea in a very fast way and you can iterate really fast because you can show very simple prototypes and see how people react. It also helps you and your team to make better decisions from there on because you now have an understanding of your target audience and what they actually think about your product or your brand or who you are and what you're doing.
And that leads to less of the discussions.
Yeah.
I think that was also, probably as someone who works with a lot of different customers, the discussions that are usually, only rooted in opinions, in informed opinions, sure, but still sort of mostly opinions, those were always the most draining for me. Because, right, like you're supposed to come along and have like a concept for the project, and you put in like a great deal of ideation and like all sorts of logic and reasoning and how you came up with it, and it has to be like usually that's an agency problem that everybody would probably can relate to, is that for the customer you can't just come along with a crude wireframe because they can't imagine what it's supposed to look like in the end. So you make a whole thing, and then you have this discussion of we need this and that differently. I don't know, pulling out
like the blue.
Exactly, like pulling out all of the agency cliches. Can you make the logo bigger? But the point is, if you have your customers say something is wrong, then there is no way that whoever is in charge of taking a decision about this project, they will respect this because your customers said so.
Yeah.
And I think that is such a powerful thing that gets absolutely underestimated. I think everybody knows this actually. I mean, how old is the saying the customer is king or queen or the boss in general? Because they're paying you the money. And still so many software development projects just bluntly ignore this. And I think that's like an interesting fact to explore why. I mean, it's not, I don't think that everybody's just being ignorant. But it's,
I think there's a lot of expertise that goes into software development too. Like it's all professionals who've worked in the field for a long time, who know how things usually work out well, and this is what they know, and this is what they put into your project. So, and there is a fair amount of stuff that just works with best practices.
yeah.
So it kind of works. I think what we learned from working with teams on MVPs is that once there is a team involved, certain dynamics start to appear. And the team initially came together to work on an idea that somebody presented to them, and they start working with it, and they take ownership of their part in it to make this idea happen, and they are invested in the idea in the end. And this leads to this dynamic where a team builds their product, the product that they want to use, and the product that they see from the very beginning, and they have an idea how this product should look and work like. And I think what we realized only recently is that this might not always be helpful, because you should be building the product of your users and not your product. And I think there's a lot of benefits in doing so that we experienced.
Absolutely. I mean, I think taking ownership of the idea is probably supernatural to happen, right? Like, it doesn't happen intentionally, I would say. Because like a team always wants to work together towards a common goal. Like, every team works that way. And it's probably a matter of how effectively you can formulate that goal. And if there's wiggle room or if it's open to definition, so to say, then people will define it. Like, they'll find something to work towards, right?
And that's usually a good thing. Like, good stuff comes out of this attitude and this ownership, I think.
Exactly. And it's not necessarily, like, we're not saying that this is wrong that they're doing it. That's not the point. I think the point is to provide this guiding principle, this North Star to rally behind. Like, that is certainly, I think, one of the absolute upsides that I've seen since we work with research methodologies of any kind. If it's usability testing on something you have at hand already that you want someone to test now, how big or small ever. If it's discovery research and you go in with your idea and you discover the nuances that actually have to go into solving for this challenge for your users for real, then I think this is a very, very motivating piece of information that can lead to your team rallying behind this idea, right? Like, where there's before you had an idea and you sort of give it into the hands of your team, and it sort of takes its own shape over the weeks that you invest, right? This is also, I think this is probably, we talked about scope creep before and how no one could ever take the decision that now it's enough features for the MVP to now launch. In all of this time, that you don't get your customers' feedback. Ideas can go this or that way.
Mm-hmm.
And by constantly showing what you have to your customers, you will always have this influx of information that if you're not inherently, unable to take sometimes maybe even negative feedback, then I think you will find that this is a very, very powerful method to unite your team and to set them onto a path to make this go away. I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think then there's like a certain, even like a element of pride that kicks in, where people say, "Fine, we have to nail this. I cannot accept that this is the feedback that we're getting," right? And that's very powerful. I think you avoid scope creep. You kind of I think, like, so for me, who never worked this way up until 3 years ago, as soon as we had discovered this, I have to say, like, just me personally, I don't know if this is universal, but like I got hooked on the method because I experienced that it's so powerful to kind of extract the correct goal to work to. I wanted it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wanted to get the next piece of feedback right away. Even if I had just something that was like 3/4 done or whatever, I just wanted to show this to someone quickly and they could say, "Oh, yeah, better," or "Not better." Worse. What's this? But then it was so easy to even throw away something that you worked on for half a day, because it's okay. Like, it's okay to accept that you just got overexcited and kind of, overshot the goal or missed it for an inch or whatever. But I think this is great. This is really a powerful method.
Yeah, I think we learned that it helps with not only aligning your team, but also external stakeholders if they might be on the project or have a say in the project, because they realize that this is the real feedback and they will get it either way, now or later. And I think for us, what we like for the work that our agency does, I think we learned that it is better to get this feedback as soon as possible, and we put everything into making that happen. Like, we really try to get the ideas out as fast as possible, to get the feedback as fast as possible, and to do that along the way all the time. Like, always take something, show it to people and see what they say, because we iterate much faster this way, and we rarely overshoot the goal, as you said.
Exactly.
In a certain direction. Yeah.
Like, while I was just listening to you, I thought it might sound like it might come off as lots of extra work that you're supposed to do in all of the work that you're already doing. You're now supposed to stop every 5 minutes, produce an artifact that you can actually show to someone. I think the opposite is the case. I think we can say as much as a sneak peek for our next episode, where we're going to focus on what exactly all of these new ways of working unlock. And I think my sneak peek for this is, sweet and short, the opposite of what you think is the case. And not in, it sort of evens out, like the time you invest to test something, you kind of save in development. No, it's massive. It's absolutely mind-blowingly massive. So much that when I experienced that for the first time, and I was skeptical because I think I didn't understand. I was so inherently in my ways of that I'm a UX professional. I should know how these things work. Like, how can I benefit from someone who's not a professional in the field to make a better product. It just took one session. It took one learning to turn me around. And by the end of the project, I'm a believer. It was crazy, really. But this is our next episode. I think this was, for me, a very interesting discussion on absolutely also a stroll down memory lane. Like my first contact with the term of MVP as someone coming out of uni in their mid-20s into the real world, and people tossing around this term like, let's build an MVP, we have a bunch of money, let's go for it. And I know it's not that easy. Like, I know people are not oblivious to that we have to talk to our customers. Like, we all know this. It's just a matter of how we implement it and how much we can get out of it. And we believe that there's just so much more than we can easily get out of this to be exponentially better than we are today. But that's the next one. And I really want to thank you for coming on for this one. I'm enjoying this series a lot, even if it's a complicated topic to untangle, I would say, because it's such a paradigm shift.
True. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome. All right. See you on the next one. Bye.